So I lost a friend today, somebody who I've known for a lot of years, my whole adult life. He passed kind of suddenly. I mean, he hadn't been really well for a long time, but, you know, nobody thought he was going to die today, or he might have died yesterday. He was found in his apartment. They had to do a health check, so the cops went, and they found him passed. And like I said, he hadn't been doing great. He was sick. He actually had some issues recently. He went for a bunch of tests, and he was waiting for them to come back. And some people think maybe he got the results, and he just didn't want to deal with it, and so he just kind of let go. I don't think he took his own life, but maybe spiritually, he just kind of let it go. Check it out. I do not want to make this video all about my friend. So I'm also going to talk about the two angles here of these lenses, because I had a tremendously difficult time matching these, and they're not even matched very well. I just kind of gave up after a while, because I'm certainly not a professional colorist, although I can generally color my own films because I match the lenses properly. But in this case, I'm shooting the main shot with my Panasonic S5, and I was using a Minolta Rokkor 35mm f2.8, which is a vintage lens. And for the close-up, I'm using the Panasonic GH5, and I have a Meike 35mm f1.4, which is a 70mm equivalent, and which is also a $75 lens. Well, that's what I paid for it on Amazon. It was on a sale. I think you can get it for around $100, brand new. It's not an old lens. It's not a vintage lens. It's a good lens, you know. If you put a bunch of filters on it, and if you don't want to deal with the extreme excessive sharpness of it. And it was just difficult to match. And I had obviously the exact same lighting. The cameras were really close to each other, so I figured, I would get roughly the same color. I obviously had my white balance set the same on both cameras. I had my light set properly to my white balance, and yet it just didn't work very well. He was an artist. He went to school for theater, I believe. I'm not even sure about that, but I know he was an actor at one point, and he wound up working for AFTRA, SAG, doing contracts and things like that, something he was very proud of. He was somebody who had a lot of integrity, He was a really honest guy. He was all about doing the right thing. But he was also like an old curmudgeon, kind of guy. He could love to complain about stuff. He could be an asshole sometimes. It was really funny. It's funny, when I found out he passed, all I could think about was his laugh. He had this incredible laugh. And I think that's how I'll always think of him, And we had some great conversations over the years. He was a big sports fan. We used to talk about sports all the time. He had moved out to Arizona a few years ago. He left New York. He was like one of those people that had like an apartment on the Upper West Side for like 40 years. And he was paying nothing, for a gigantic, beautiful pre-war apartment, everybody's dream. And I know it was really, really hard for him to give that up. It's hard for anybody in New York City to give that up, but I know it was really hard for him. I wanted to talk about how it is difficult to match these cameras sometimes, unless you're using the same lenses. And I also want to talk about how right now I have a Minolta 28mm f2.8 Telesor vintage lens on the Panasonic S5. Now, it's a 28mm, which means it's a 56mm equivalent. And right now I'm about, I would say, about 12, 15 feet from the camera, because I'm at, 56mm, which is basically like a Helios lens, which is 58mm. I'm getting to use my vintage lens on the GH5, but it's kind of a problem, because what I love most about this lens is what happens on the edges. And since the GH5 is cropping in on this lens, I'm only really getting the middle of the lens. I'm not getting the extreme edges, and I'm kind of losing the weirdness of this lens that I love, the imperfections. Like when I use it on my full frame camera on the S5, it's, you know, when I focus on something, always to the right of the frame, it's out of focus. And unless I focus extremely to the right of the frame, I'm always going to have out of focus on the right of the frame and everything's in focus on the left of the frame. And it looks so awesome because it just naturally rolls off like that. I love the highlight roll off on this lens. The colors on it are beautiful. It's a weird lens. You know, a lot of people might hate it, but I happen to love it. And I believe he went back to Arizona to take care of his mother, maybe? I'm not even sure about that. But, you know, I think he was 72 years old, so he was not young, but certainly not old, you know. But he was not the healthiest guy. And, but he lived with a lot of joy, and he had a lot of great friends, and a lot of people loved him a lot, you know, like he was very fortunate. He had a pretty blessed life, you know. He was around people that did a lot of fantastic things. He got to, you know, he got to enjoy a lot of things in his life that I think brought him a lot of enjoyment, you know. And I think he was a pretty happy person, you know, even though he complained a lot and people looked at him as kind of a negative person sometimes. I always thought he was like kind of a jolly guy, you know. So I'm using it actually. I adapted it to this camera and I'm doing this for the first time. So I actually have never seen the footage using this lens on this camera. So when I get to DaVinci Resolve later, if I don't like the way it looks, you probably won't see. Well, nah, you know what? I'm gonna show you regardless. Let's see what happens. Like he was like that guy who could be kind of condescending and snarky and all that, but really at the end of the day, he had a huge heart. That's how I viewed him, you know, and he was always kind to me, and all the conversations we had, you know, he was a very sentimental person. He was very sensitive. I think he was kind of lonely a lot of the time, but in the way that he wanted a partner, maybe, you know, he wasn't married, but he was certainly not lonely and was not poor for friends, you know. Like I said, there were a lot of people who loved him. You know, the other thing is I'm shooting right now at f4 on this Micro Four Thirds camera on this Minolta lens, which means it's really kind of f8, which is really what I want, you know. So I want to see if it looks the same as f8 on my full frame camera, because I use this lens all the time on the S5. I know exactly what it looks like at every aperture. I always know what I can expect, and when I'm in a situation like this where there's a bridge way behind me and perhaps some birds flying by and stuff like that, I want you to be able to see it, but I don't want it to be ultra sharp. You know, I want to have some kind of blur in the background. So I want to see what f4 looks like on this Micro Four Thirds, if it's really more like f8. And like I said, I'm shooting 28 millimeters, so obviously I'm at 56 millimeters, but I'm not getting to use the entire lens, which is kind of a drag, you know. And I think that's the disadvantage of working with Micro Four Thirds. So why am I sharing this on my YouTube channel? You know, I feel really lucky to be an artist who, in my opinion, I know how to look for the beautiful in everything. And I think that annoys a lot of people, to be honest with you, but I really do look for the beautiful. I believe that no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how horrific it is, there's always something beautiful there, you know, unless you are completely 100% jaded. There's always something heroic, something small, maybe a tiny little branch is growing out of some concrete that for a moment you could look at it and go, wow, how is that even happening? You know, like, it could be something small, it could be something big, maybe just an act of kindness in the middle of chaos. Just, there's always something beautiful. When you're sick, when you're dying, when you're on dialysis, when you're having chemotherapy, whatever, there's always something there. That's beautiful. You know, my father showed me that when he was sick. My mother showed me that. My grandmother showed me that. My best friend, who, you know, died when he was 42 years old, he had a tremendous amount of joy in his life, but he really suffered at the end of his life. Now, I guess I can get a speed booster and then get more of the lens. I mean, I'm not really sure how that works, and I'm not an expert at that, so I don't know. But I think your best bet with Micro Four Thirds is to get great native lenses, or I guess you can adapt lenses where you don't, you know, fall in love with the edges of your lens, you know, or get anamorphic lenses made for Micro Four Thirds. Like, I have anamorphic lenses for my S5, but I can't even adapt them because I can't adapt L mount to Micro Four Thirds. And I think as artists, I think that's what it's about. I think that's what I look for in a great artist. You know, I worked with somebody this past weekend, somebody who I know for a long time, who is an artist. But one thing I kind of hate to say this, but it's true. I don't find any joy in her work as an artist, her art. You know, I think she has joy in her life, you know what I mean? But her craft, I don't feel that. I don't feel that genuine love. I feel a tremendous amount of ambition, and I feel a tremendous amount of ego and a need for acknowledgement, you know, like the kind of person who's constantly telling you where they've been and what they've done, and, you know, like they need you to know that they have all these accomplishments behind them, instead of just being and doing, you know, instead of just like working on a project and not feeling the need to let everybody around you know who you are and what you're about. That's not finding the beautiful in anything, you know. Like, that's the other thing for me personally. I'm never going to switch fully to Micro Four Thirds because all of my lenses are full frame lenses, and I can't adapt them to a Micro Four Thirds. I can adapt these vintage lenses, but I can't adapt L mount lenses, and, you know, I use my anamorphic lenses a lot, so that's a problem. The most important work that I've ever created, in my opinion, was a play about a horrific tragedy, something that was like a supreme injustice. You know, something that I think is hard for a lot of people to look at as, you know, having even anything that is remotely beautiful about it. But I found so much about it to be beautiful because I met the people who lost him. And I got to know them. And they were the most inspirational people I've ever known in my life. Imagine losing your son when he's young, just as he's about to get married, coming home from his bachelor party, murdered by police for no reason, shot 50 times unarmed, killed, life ended. A daughter who will never know her father on Father's Day or her birthday or any, you know, like a woman who was about to marry him who was probably forever changed. You know, a mother and a father who lost their son, siblings who lost a brother, you know, a community of people who loved him. Like, you know, he was the kind of guy who, if there was one person who nobody could even imagine him being in trouble or anything like that, it was this guy. And this happens to him. And so how could you find something beautiful in that? But I created a love story around that. A love story. Because he had a beautiful life too, you know. He loved a lot of things. He was beloved by his friends. He enjoyed things, you know. He looked forward to things. He was optimistic. He had great plans. He had a beautiful family, a loving family. And so much good came out of his tragedy. And, you know, tragedies happen every day in this world. So, you know, I love the GH5. You know, I've gotten some incredible footage out of it. And believe it or not, you know, like I say in this, I think in the video I did before this, I shot a project last week using a Ttartisans 17mm f1.4 and this Meike 35mm f1.4 on the GH5 paired with the Panasonic S5. And on the S5, I was using, believe it or not, the 20-60 kit lens. And I think because there was just light blazing into this space, you know, and I really had to focus on my angles and my lighting, and I was kind of using where the direct light came in. I would put the lens just off to the side of the direct light, so it would give it this kind of hazy kind of feeling. And I was able to match them really well, and it actually looks beautiful. So that Ttartisans 17mm, which is a 35mm equivalent, looks really beautiful on this GH5, as does the Meike. I mean, I shot a video once with the 35mm Meike going into the city, taking the train from upstate New York all the way down to Manhattan. And I got some beautiful footage, and I got great footage of the city that day. Look what's happening around the world right now, you know. Look what's going on in Syria right now. We have no idea how that's going to work out. But they overthrew an oppressive dictatorial government. There were people crawling out of underground prisons that they've been in for years that people thought they were just gone. And here they come, emerging, you know. Obviously, a lot of people are dead too, but then there's this elation because there's like the possibility of freedom in a place where there has not been freedom for a long time. There's been no respect for women, for differences of, you know, ways to love. And, you know, like it's just been a, you know, a dictatorship. So I don't know what it was last night, you know, when I shot this talking head part. Maybe I should have focused more, but the problem with the GH5 too, I think if I were to use the GH5 as my main camera, then I would have to use an external monitor all the time, because honestly, the monitor on this camera sucks, you know? I mean, the monitor on the Panasonic S5 is really good, and I can see clearly, and I know, you know, I know exactly what I'm getting. This, it just dims, and, you know, I've gone through this with so many people, there's no way to fix that, and I can't really tell what's going on. So I suppose if I used it all the time as my main camera, I would get used to it. But I think I would just have to use an external monitor all the time, and that means I would have to put a cage on it, and I don't really like working like that. That's not my workflow, you know? A brutal, you know, government. And yet, art comes from that place. You know, art comes from all these places that, you know, look at a band like Pussy Riot in Russia. You know, these women, they keep going to prison every few years, but they just continue to create art. And it's art, it's songs, you know what I mean? They're a band. And yet the government feels that they need to throw them in prison. And it just shows you how powerful art can be. I take my cameras all over the place. I mean, I know a cage is not a big deal, but, you know, then I'd have an external monitor on it. I have my microphone on it, because I always have this Boya shotgun mic on the top of my camera. You know, I mean, I suppose if I had a cage, I could also use the Hollyland Lark Max at the same time as well. And if you see these women and you hear them speak, you will be inspired. You will be lifted. You will be encouraged. You will think you ain't got no problems, because they're beautiful. You know, and I'm not talking about they're fine-ass women. They're beautiful, like their spirits, their, you know, their integrity, you know, their commitment to what they believe in. And somehow, you know, they go through all this stuff and they want to write music, you know. Theater has always been that way, you know. People write theater about horrible things, but what is theater? Theater is an entertainment form, you know. You come to a theater, you want to feel things, you know. And you know, when you come to see a great play, or if you go see a great movie, you know, excuse me, about something difficult, like you ever see a movie called Rabbit Proof Fence? Rabbit Proof Fence is about these girls who were living during the apartheid in South Africa. Or maybe it took place in Australia. I can't even remember now, but these were mixed race young girls, sisters. And at that time in their country, they would send young kids who were of mixed race to these camps to just wash the blackness out of them so that they could function as fully white people. And so they took these girls from their family, and there was a fence that kept rabbits out of these farms, because the rabbits would go in and kill all the crops and eat everything. So they had these fences around. They were called rabbit-proof fences. And these girls would take this bus and they'd be taken away to this place. And they would continually break out, follow this fence, and walk home. I believe it was hundreds of miles. They did that throughout their lives. Well, one of them did. I don't want to tell you the whole movie because you should go see the movie. Because I like to have a lot of audio going on at the same time so I could have backups if anything happens, because I've experienced that. I actually experienced that with this other project the other day where the audio got screwed up going right into the camera, and I had a backup, you know, recording directly into the Hollyland microphone, and it just sounded pristine, like it was beautifully captured. But obviously it was tragic. They took these children from their family, they sent them to these places. You know, they were fighting with this, you know, with this government for their whole life. And yet, it's one of the most beautiful stories you will ever see in your life. Just absolutely magnificent, you know, like, you know, I guess what it does is it inspires you to think like, man, I ain't got no problems, you know, like, what am I complaining about? I don't like my camera. I need a new camera. I need more lenses, you know. I need a better audio device. You know, that's the thing, like you need a new camera because you don't understand how beautiful what you have is and what you can create. Like the camera is so far down the list of what you should be thinking about when you're creating art. And you know, look, obviously I'm not talking about if you're a wedding photographer or a corporate person, or you need, like, you know, you need this functionality to just get stuff done because you're not really thinking of it in an artistic way. You're thinking of it to make money, to build your brand, to build your company, to feed your family. That's great, you know, but that's not really thinking of it as an artist. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you have to admit it's not. You might be doing the best you can, and you probably started out, you probably thought that I want to be Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola, or, you know, like somebody like that when you started. But you wound up doing corporate work, and now you're making a lot of money and you enjoy it, and it's fun. You know, it's fun, and the gear is fun. But it's probably not how you started. You know, that's why I enjoy using the Panasonic S5, and I have no desire at all to upgrade to the S5 II or the S5 IIX because, you know, their sensors don't look as good. Yeah, you know, this video is about that too. You know, I don't want it to be all about my friend. Because, you know, when you lose somebody, one thing I've learned, because I've experienced so much loss in my life, you know, when somebody dies, the world doesn't care. And if they do care, they care for a couple of minutes, you know. Even the people close to you, like, yeah, they'll be affected for that day or maybe even for a week, or if you have a memorial, you know, you have those moments. But life is brutal in the fact that it just keeps moving. You know, it never stops, you know. You know, even though you could probably make anything look great right now with LUTs and, you know, post-production work, you know, these lenses, I mean, these lenses and these cameras have such high resolution that you could probably make them look like whatever you want them to look like. But I know that the resolution of my camera is not what it is on the new ones, and that makes it actually look better, more like a movie, more cinematic, more natural, not as sharp. I mean, that's the brutal part of life and the beautiful part of life. Like, no matter what goes on, no matter what horrific things are happening, or no matter what celebratory things, what amazing things are happening, it doesn't matter. People are still going to work, they're still going to the doctor, they're still getting on the train, they're still getting on the bus, they're still going to practice, they're still going to class. Like, they're still doing what they do, because 99.9999999% of the world doesn't even know about your tragedy, and even if they do know, they don't care, you know. So I recognize the beautiful in my camera, you know. I recognize the beautiful in my lenses because they're imperfect. They have character, they have personality. That's what I'm looking for as an artist, you know. I'm looking for the beautiful. But I digress. This is not a video about cameras, but that was a good opportunity to kind of throw that in there, you know, like, you know, just as an aside, you can get a Panasonic S5 or you can get a GH5. I'm shooting on the GH5 right there, that angle, and this is the Panasonic S5 right here. GH5, S5. You could get these so cheap, you know, but you think you need to spend a lot of money to get one of the new cameras, you know. A Sony a6700, you know, maybe you spend $1,300. Maybe you could get a Sony FX30 for only $1,500 or $1,600 now, and they're great cameras, you know. And they have great autofocus, and they have features that make things easier for you, and that is an advantage for sure. But don't think you can't afford something that can enable you to make something beautiful, you know? And that's even exacerbated now with this age of social media, where we live in this, you know, scrolling timeline life where things happen so fast, we just get desensitized to everything, you know? And, you know, add to that political leaders who will just say anything outrageous, and after a while they just continue to say it and they continue to say it, and it just doesn't mean anything. Whether you believe it or not, it just doesn't mean anything anymore because you're hearing it constantly. I mean, there are cameras for $200 that you could make something beautiful. You can make something. I made something beautiful with my phone. So anyway, look at what's happening. Like, I lost a friend today, and I'm thinking about all this other stuff, you know. And all I can hear in my head is his laugh. And you know what? When I get to the end of my life, I don't think anybody's going to say, when I think of Rock, I think of his laugh, because I hardly ever laugh out loud, you know? I mean, I could be funny, and I could joke around, and I know people who really know me know that I love to prank people all the time. But this guy laughed all the time. And it just strikes me like, I think because of that, my perception is that he was happy and he had a good life. He loved to laugh. Now, I know, you know, it's like the clown thing, you know, the people that laugh the most are probably the most depressed in many cases, and maybe that's true, I don't know, but still, when you laugh, think about when a baby laughs uncontrollably. It makes everybody in the room happy. It makes everybody else laugh. You cannot not smile when you hear a baby laughing, you know? You can't. It's like seeing a dog get all excited and jump around. You can't help but be happy. Those endorphins start going crazy in your body. And so my friend who passed, you know, I can't get his laugh out of my head, and I think that's gonna be what endures for me. When I think about him, I'm always gonna think about his laugh. And you're seeing things on social media constantly. You know, you might see some tragic thing, and you know, in the past when we would mourn stuff for weeks at a time, you know, even then, before we had social media, life keeps moving. I'm always going to think about the conversations we had about the Yankees and the Knicks and the Giants, you know, like, I'm going to think about that. And sometimes Phoenix athletes, you know, he loved to talk about Charles Barkley because he was from Phoenix originally, but he was a New Yorker. I mean, he lived in New York from the time he was like, I think 20 years oldish, all the way till, you know, he was 68 years old or something like that. Maybe 65. I mean, he was a New Yorker. And he was a New Yorker. Like, you know, he was a stereotypical Upper West Side New York guy. I remember when my grandfather died, it was my first gigantic loss. I mean, I had a cousin who died at 19. That was a pretty big loss in my mind. But I wasn't really that close to her, to be honest. So when my grandfather died, he was like my world, you know? And I was actually angry that life just kept moving. Like, I was mad when I was like, you know, I'd get out of my apartment, I was walking around Manhattan and seeing people just get on the train or walk up and down the streets, going to the shoe store, go to a bakery, go into a bookshop, go to the movies. I'm like, yo, how could you go to the movies? You know, my grandfather just died. And so it's hard to lose somebody, but I see a lot of beautiful. I love all the friends that he had, you know. I mean, he was part of a very special community, and I look at them as a gigantic tree, you know. And lately, branches from that tree have been falling. And one day there's going to be no branches left on that tree. And then there's going to be new generations of trees that know nothing about the tree that's now gone. And, you know, hopefully that tree will start to grow new branches, buds, whatever. I don't know how that works. But I do know that things end, you know, people die. You know, life happens and then it's gone. And like my mother said just before she died, it's like a dream. You know, how are we not like having all flags, you know, raised at half-mast and stores closed and, you know, just people talking about him? Like, I was young, but I wasn't even that young. But I couldn't believe it. You know, I was like, wow, life is crazy like that. You know, like big things happen in your life and it just shows you how small you are, you know, how insignificant you are. And that self-love is a big thing because ain't nobody else going to give you that kind of love, even the people closest to you. Because you know, everybody's born here on their own and they leave here on their own. And that's what happened to my friend the other day. You know, think back. I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're 15, 25, 55, 85. Think back 10 years ago and just think about how close that seems to right now. You know, when I think about myself 20 years ago, and then I think, oh my God, 20 years from now, is that long? Like, that seems like yesterday. That means I'm going to be 20 years older that fast? That bugs me out. But that's how life works, and I think it accelerates as we get older. And that's why I love art so much, you know? Because life is hard, you know, it's challenging. You know, look what just happened with this healthcare guy that got murdered. And all these people are having a blast over it, you know? Like, people are happy about it, and they're making all these jokes, and there's memes and all this because, you know, somebody shot him with a gun in the back and murdered him. That's not a good thing. But the healthcare system systemically kills people by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions probably. It's absolutely true. How many people do you personally know who were turned down for treatment that they needed? And you know, most people are not going to fight to get that treatment. Most people are just going to let it go, and the healthcare system knows that. They know that like 80% of people are just going to quit and let it go, but they also know that the 20% that continue to fight, they actually have to provide them with that care in most cases. And so, like I said, a lot of people loved him, but he was also equal parts an asshole a lot of the time. But he was our asshole, you know? And I know I loved him. He was a really good guy. He was very good to me. He was never an asshole to me. Although he wouldn't watch my movies because he was one of these people that wouldn't let you change. You know, like he knew me as a musician, you know? So when I went into the theater, he would never come to my plays, you know? Even though I was selling out, getting like reviews off the charts, you know, winning awards, winning festivals, traveling all over the world, he would not accept that I was now an actor, a solo theater artist. Even after like a decade passed, he still looked at me as a musician, and that's all he would talk about when he talked to me is music and sports. Because he knew I played football in college. So he looked at me as like a jock and a musician. And he let me slide with that because, you know, I grew up playing ball. You know, I was an athlete growing up. But then when I became an adult, I was a musician. And so that's how he looked at me. And a lot of people are like that. And so in that way, he was an asshole. So what's beautiful about any of that? What's beautiful is that I think that people in this country are realizing for the first time in a very long time that unless you're a billionaire or a multi-millionaire, we all have the same complaint here. That our healthcare sucks, that it's unjust, that it's cruel, that it is murderous. I mean, I've seen it in my family. I've seen it personally. I bet you have too. I bet everybody has. And so if that's something that brings us together, that's a beautiful thing. You know, and maybe great art will come out of that. Maybe great relationships will come out of that. Maybe great solutions will come out of that. Maybe people will finally get together and really get involved in the democracy in this country based on something that's not even a political issue. It's a social issue. It's a cultural issue. It's a people issue. It's not politics. It's not your opinion. It's fact that no matter how you feel about your politics, your healthcare sucks when it comes down to when you need it the most. I don't think anybody in this country can say, I'm happy with my health care. Across the board, everything's taken care of. Dental, vision, emergencies, transplants. Like, I'm good. I know I'm going to be taken care of. I'm not afraid. There are so many people in this country. Do you know that we are the only country in the world where people go bankrupt from medical debt? There's not one other country in the world where anybody goes bankrupt from medical debt. And yet, we have millions of people who have experienced that. He would not watch my movies. And you know what? He would have loved my movies. He was such a New York motherfucker. Like, he would have loved, at least especially my first film, which is an absolute love letter to New York City. During the pandemic, he would have loved it, but he couldn't get past it. So, yeah, I felt a certain kind of way about that. But, you know, whatever. I mean, you know, I don't care at the end of the day. At the end of the day, he had a big heart. He was very loyal to his friends, you know. He was very particular and he was very stubborn, but he was very loyal. And, you know, even if he was being stubborn about something and if he withdrew, he always was open to you apologizing and fixing it. I don't know that he would ever apologize, but, you know, I know a few cases where he forgave immediately. Like, somebody would just have to reconnect with him and he'd be like, okay, we're good, you know. So I say all that to say, if we can all come together now, that's a beautiful thing. If suddenly you're looking across the aisle and you're like, damn, you know, like you're looking at your neighbor who you thought was so different than you, but then you realize, you know, when it comes to your family and the people who you love and your relationships, you know, your cousins, your uncles, your aunts, your mother, your grandmother, your child, you know, your schoolmates, your co-workers, the people who play Little League with your kids, the people who are in the band with your kids, the people who you get on the bus with, who you ride the train with, like, we're all experiencing the exact same thing. I find that inspiring. I find that kind of magnificent. And it makes me optimistic because it makes me feel like if there's one thing that can bring us together, I think it's survival. I think it's the fear of not being taken care of when you're sick. The fear of your parent, you know, being vulnerable and not getting what they need. Your child, you know, needing to be helped and they can't. Your brother, your sister, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, your husband. The thought of people being rejected, and it's not just a possibility like, oh my God, you know, maybe we're going to lose our Social Security. It's not that. It's been happening forever. It's what we are. It's what our healthcare system is. And how did I get here talking about this? He was a really good guy. He was funny as hell. He was really smart and really interesting guy, you know, and a real patron of the arts, an artist's heart. He was a good guy, you know, and he was a real New Yorker, and I think he really enjoyed being a part of this community that he was a part of. You know, we call them the Raleigh, and I'm not going to get into why because I didn't want to mention any names in this video about anybody because, you know, it ain't about them, it ain't about me, it's about all of us, you know. And I wanted this video to be kind of universal because I guarantee you, every single one of you, if you haven't experienced something like this already, you will, because that's the nature of life. You see, I think when somebody passes who you know for a long time and who's really kind of in your world, I think it just makes you reflect upon everything and you start thinking about crazy stuff. You know, I'm thinking about cameras. Like, how could you complain about a camera, you know? It's beautiful. You know, what you have the opportunity to make something beautiful, to create a story, you know? The people who you love, the people who you enjoy, the people who are your compadres, you know, your, you know, people in your group, your friends, you know, your associates, your co-workers, your loved ones. You're going to lose people. It's going to happen if you don't go first. And you got to learn that life goes on, you know. Healthcare. It's making me think about healthcare. It's making me think about his laugh. You know, it's making me think about so many things. Calling people I haven't spoken to in a long time. Beefs I have with people. But also at the same time, it's making me think about the people in my life that have no business being in my life. Because I know that they're just toxic for me. Like I don't really respect them. So why would, you know, I don't hate them. I don't wish anything bad on anybody, but why would I have anybody like that in my life? You know, it makes you think about stuff like that. When I first heard that he died, I found out via text, and I was driving, and it hit me like it felt like somebody stuck a machete in my sternum, and I just started crying. And you know, I don't even know if it was specifically for him. I mean, obviously, I felt this deep loss of him, but it just reminded me of all the other losses that I've had, and I've had a few recently, and just like how that just happens, you know. And as I get older, it happens more often, you know. It's like it becomes a part of your life, and that sucks, right? That sucks. So get used to it. Makes you think about the people that matter, the things that matter. Makes you think about wanting to take care of yourself, you know, to be healthy, to be able to continue to live a life where you can, you know, do the things that you want to do and enjoy them, and laugh a little bit. So, you know, I made a video the other day about not having any intention and feeling bad about a video that I posted, and, you know, somebody came on my channel and commented that, you know, he appreciated when I come on here and just go off the top of my head sometimes, and then when I went back and I watched that video, I thought, you know what, it wasn't that bad, to be honest with you. It wasn't that bad. And so here I did have an intention. I knew exactly what I was going to talk about, but now I've talked about things that I wasn't even thinking about before. And I'm grateful for that, because I think some of these things need to be spoken about, you know, and it's good that we talk about them. And I guess I'll end this video, or this part of the video, by saying, learn how to find the beautiful in everything, even the loss, even the death, even the illness, even the injustice, even the horrific things that exist in the world. You have to find some joy in your life every day. You have to find something beautiful inside of every moment. You know, like when you're feeling just absolutely horrible, just terrible, you know, when you're completely depressed and you're like ready to give up on life, just look around. There's so many beautiful things, you know. There are these birds behind me, the bridge behind me, the Hudson River. Like, there's so many beautiful things here, you know. And somebody in my life just died yesterday. Or it's so horrible that they don't even know if he died yesterday, the day before. Like, they found him because he wasn't getting back to anybody for a few days, and that was unlike him. So today was a pretty sad day. But I learned when my father died that death can be really beautiful. It could be one of the most beautiful parts of our lives. You know, my father and I had a very difficult relationship, and the most beautiful time of our collective life together was when he was sick and when he finally died. Because we healed everything. We came together. We finally loved each other. I told my father I loved him for the first time in my life the night before he died. And I'm so grateful that I did that. You know, my mother, the same thing, you know, like, we had such a beautiful time together, and she went through shit that nobody should ever have to go through, like unspeakable crap. I watched the medical world kill my mother. She didn't die from her disease. She died from her treatment. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'll never forget the time I had with her at the end. My grandmother too. There's so much beautiful to the fact that people's hearts were so swollen over that, and that all of these people, like, I hope when I die that people are fucking depressed, you know, and then I hope that they throw a party and celebrate me and eat chocolate cookies and, you know, go to the San Gennaro Festival and go to a Yankee game and, you know, listen to Miles and Coltrane and go see some solo theater and watch my videos and watch my movies and talk about me and talk about one another and love one another and hug one another and all of it. I hope they do that when I die, you know. But yeah, of course, I hope they cry. You know, I hope they sob. I hope they weep, because that'll mean that mine was a life well lived, that I was loved, that I mattered, that people cared about me, you know. That's the great thing about my friend. So many people are sad right now. So many people have taken this as like a call to action to take care of things, because he was smart enough to set up his life and tell people what needed to be done if he ever died, and now they have a plan. And I think that's so beautiful, because they're going to carry out his plan. So there's always something beautiful, no matter what's going on. You just have to look for it. You have to be strong enough to find it. And I'm not saying it's going to make everything better. I'm not saying it's going to change anything, but it's definitely good nutrition. I think it's necessary for survival. And so just appreciate your life, and appreciate how fragile it is. Appreciate how You know, nothing is promised, and appreciate the opportunity that you have every day to enjoy yourself, to feel good, even if you're sick, even if you're handicapped, even if you're challenged in some kind of way, you know, which I'm not. I'm so privileged. You know, I'm so privileged in so many ways. But no matter who you are, you do have the opportunity in some kind of way, you know, within the parameters of who you are, to find some kind of joy, some kind of love. You know, Helen Keller did it. You know, people like that, like, people do it. So, yeah, to know that no matter what's going on right now, first of all, is temporary, unless you died. Everything is temporary, and second of all, there's something beautiful here. Live this life, love this life, appreciate this life, and, you know, as far as I'm concerned, make art. Because art is the most beautiful thing on this earth, you know. There's nothing more beautiful than the fact that we can create art. I love that so much. When you think about it, that's my vessel to be able to find something beautiful in everything. You know, I can write a story, I can film something, I could write a play, I could write a song, I can, you know, I can go to a museum, I could do anything I want in the midst of sadness and sorrow and, you know, all the horrible things. Right now I'm looking at a woman holding her baby. It's probably her grandchild, and it just makes me think about when I was a kid, that somebody was doing that to me. And this woman is just filled with so much joy. And this little kid is so funny. And I'm only using one camera, and they're going to be gone by the time I finish talking, so I won't even be able to shoot it. But I'm sure you have that vision in your head, and I hope you don't unsee it, at least for this moment, because right now she's holding his shoulders and she's helping him walk. And he can't, you know, he's doing that kid walk where you lean forward, and if you don't help him, he's going to fall right on his face. He's such a tiny little thing, and that's where we all begin. So keep that in your head, and have a beautiful day. There is something beautiful right here. You just have to look for it. Go look for it.